It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. What's up? Welcome. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. Logan coming to us from Mobile, Alabama, site of the Senior Bowl. Logan, how is it down there? I missed the Senior Bowl. It's probably one of my favorite events on the NFL calendar.
It's cool, man. Like, I came down here and not really knowing what to expect. First off, my trip down here was absolutely insane, but finally made it, got here, and it's so different than like the combine, for example. There's so much less like sheen on it, and your access to scouts, your access to coaches is just so much greater because it's just they're right there. You can talk to the players after every practice if you want to. It's pretty cool. So I don't know. I like the event. I like the access. I like the way it's structured, and obviously the way it's run. So I'm just excited to, we'll talk about practice from yesterday, but, excited to just watch the rest of the week and see how these guys play. Cause I'm here really for the football as much as all that other stuff is great,
Yeah, I mean, the access is the best that you get. And it's also the access to the players. It is the only event that's like this. I mean, I guess if you go to like the NFLPA College Bowl or some of the other small
or the Shrine Bowl,
the Shrine Bowl, you get some of that as well. But like the Senior Bowl, because it's not NFL run, like that's the other thing that is, I don't want to say nice about it and like take a dig at the NFL, but like it's run by the Senior Bowl organization. Jim Nagy and the crew down there do such a great job of running it. And because there's kind of less of the formal barriers, I mean, I used to watch practice. I try to always get one practice in sitting next to like one of the Washington scouts and just be like, let's talk ball. Keep an eye on practice. Hey, what do you like about this guy? And they would be cool with it. And that's just not a thing that you can do really anywhere else. And then also, you get to watch the workouts. That's the other thing. Like at the combine, it's always so silly because you're there in Indy watching on TV like everyone else. And so if you can actually get access to see these guys up close, you have a better feel for them, and you can do, especially if you're someone like you with your background and your knowledge level, like you get some football knowledge that you or some glean some things that you can't watching tape, that you can't just by hearing or reading scouting reports. You can really see the size, feel the strength, see the speed. I remember one last quick story from me before we get into what you've seen so far and how the Commanders are treating this. Whatever year Baker came out, was that 18? I think that he came out.
Yeah,
maybe, whatever year he came out. He came like a couple days late, and it was like a big mystery. Is Baker going to come? Is he not? Is he going to come? Is he not? And we finally found out, like, yeah, he's coming. And he shows up, and the whole tenor of the week changed. And like you could see the leadership, you could see the charisma, and then he starts throwing and you can see the arm. And I remember being down there going, that dude's going number one. Like I know there's other guys that are in consideration here. He's going to beat out them all because just his demeanor, the way he carried himself, his energy, the way he stole the week. I was like, that's a franchise quarterback. Right. And obviously it's gone up and down for Baker in his career. Had some really good years in Cleveland, and obviously it's kind of gone downhill. But there was no surprise to me when he ultimately went number one to Cleveland based off of that Senior Bowl week. So those are the kind of things that you can feel in person. So what is kind of the vibe down there this week? I know it's a bit of a lighter roster in terms of star power than some previous years.
Sure.
But what is the vibe down there in Mobile for the Senior Bowl this year so far?
Well, I think the roster that they've constructed down here kind of reflects the draft. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of like really talented edge rushers, supposedly, right? Guys who are going to be, maybe not the number one guys in the draft. Like Tyree Wilson was supposed to be down here. The kid from Texas Tech who's like 6'6", he's got those like 36-inch arms. He's like kind of this year's Trayvon Walker, kind of athletic freak, really big dude. And he was supposed to be down here, but then he's projected to be a top 5 pick. So it's like, well, actually, I'm not going to come. And so you lose some of those kind of top end guys. But so there's that element. Then there's the offensive line this year, I think is deeper than people are going to talk about. I don't think the top 3 guys are as good as they were last year, but I think the middle of this draft class for the O-line is really talented, and that shows up every day. There's 3 good centers. They all practice really, really well. And then this is a very deep cornerback class, and all like the top, I think it's like top 8, 9, 10 guys who are kind of projected to go in the top of the second aren't here. But I will say that this is kind of where you find that second, third, fourth round gem, and there's some guys that have done a nice job. I will say the thing that's a little disappointing, obviously, is the quarterback play, because all the top guys are the top guys, and these guys are a little bit middling. And then the receivers are kind of so-so. I think there's some good backs here, and so some good linebackers, but I think the receiver talent is probably the lowest, and I think that reflects the overall draft composition. Like the top end receivers, Addison and Johnson, are good players, but are they first round picks in another year? Probably not, So I think that, I think that this draft class is kind of the Senior Bowl reflects the draft class in a really specific way.
If you look at those strengths and weaknesses and kind of look ahead to some of the teams in front of Washington, do you think this ultimately plays out to be a good thing for Washington? Because while some of the strengths don't match up, a lot of them do, specifically on that O-line.
Yeah.
So like early look, where it's February 1st.
Yeah.
The draft is still April, but this is what we do for a couple of months. Like, how does the draft and the talent pool shape up for Washington if they were to stay at 16?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I've been kind of kicking around is that I think the first 3 offensive linemen are probably going to be gone. Broderick Jones, who I haven't watched yet, has been projected to us in a couple mock drafts. He would be a possibility at 16, but I've also seen mocks where all 3 of those guys are gone already. The kid from Northwestern, the left tackle from Ohio State, and then Broderick Jones, right, are the top 3 guys. And if that's the case, I think then they probably go DB in the first round, because like I said, there's like literally like 8 to 10 guys who are, probably have first round grades that are kind of being mocked in the first round. So obviously a very, very deep cornerback group. And I think that that's going to characterize the first round. I think you'll see probably 8 DBs go. And I think Washington will probably be a team that takes one. If that's true and there are 8 DBs selected, I think that bodes well for them getting a very talented offensive lineman in the second round. Now, we could do a lot of talking about offensive line. I don't know how much you want to talk about that on the podcast, but this is a deep group with some guys that I think are very, very good football players. And and I'd like to probably delve into that a little bit, I think.
Yeah, no, let's do it. Because the Commanders, so like if we were to identify team needs, we would say they need another corner. A nickel corner would be ideal, I think, because you got St. Juste on the outside, and then we'll see what they do with Kendall, whether they bring him back as is contract-wise, whether they restructure him, or you might need another outside corner, depending on what you do with some of the other guys, the younger guys, and how they develop. And then also, I mean, Danny was good, but I think they're very clearly looking to upgrade it at slot corner. So DB certainly is a need. Offensive line, they need at least 2, if not 3.
Right.
And then they probably need another linebacker. And the good news is that kind of ends the list of like needs. There's other things like they need a kick returner, but that's not high on your list necessarily, and it's the kind of thing you can get for a bargain in free agency. So there's like definitely other things, but those are your highest level needs, and you've got your first round pick and a ton of cap space to be able to do that if you don't blow a ton of money on a quarterback. Mm-hmm. So, by the way, speaking of quarterbacks, we will react to the Tom Brady news coming up at the end of the podcast. Someone who obviously will not be going to the Commanders because he's not going anywhere. But that's kind of the interesting thing is like, okay, you're going to use some money on free agents at a premier position and one of those premier needs. And then your first round draft pick theoretically is going to get the other. But the hard part is like the free agency period coming first means you kind of got to guess. Right. So what kind of depth, if you say like, all right, we're going to leave one of these O-line spots for the draft, how does that match up with where they're sitting and kind of the depth of the draft? What caliber of player you can get, not just over the long term, but immediately at right tackle, at the guard spots, and even frankly at center, where Chase Roullier, if you wanted to move on from him contractually, like you could save a decent amount of money. And with the injury history, it feels like you need some depth there because you can't necessarily count on him.
Right. So I think what you'll probably end up doing is this free agent market is not very good. So I think that obviously immediately just bumps the value of the draft, right? So everyone says, oh, you can wait on corner, you can find a corner in free agency. Not a great cornerback free agency, but very strong. Very strong in terms of drafts. Offensive line, there's Orlando Brown Jr. in Kansas City, and then there's Caleb McGarry in Atlanta. I would imagine they're going to try and find a way to extend Caleb in Atlanta. And I would imagine they're going to do something to keep Orlando Brown Jr. in Kansas City. So, if those top free agents are off the board, like who do you go to? And the list is not very long. So I will say, if I'm the Commanders, what I'm thinking is I probably go corner offensive tackle in the first round, and then I get the other one in the second round. I would probably say corner because I think the corner class really dips off, and I think if I was going to kind of point to something specifically. So like there's some guys here who are pretty good cornerbacks, right, at the Senior Bowl. And of the guys that were supposed to do well, not all of them did very well. And the guy that did really well was Julius Burtz out of Kansas State, who is this 6'3", 200-pound corner who played a lot of cover 4 in college and looked like he struggled at times, but was probably the best in the one-on-ones yesterday, right? So interesting, like Tyreek Stevenson, Rajon Wright, these guys that were supposed to be really good, who I have higher grades on from the tape, they performed not as well as this other guy, Julius Burt. So it's like, again, how do you weigh that? But I think that the second class of corner in this class is probably not as good as those top end guys like Devon Witherspoon or something like that. So I would probably go corner in the first round just because I think the value is a little bit better there for the team. I think there's a lot of them that are really good. And then I'd say you kind of get your pick of offensive linemen. So there's Jalen Duncan from Maryland. He measured a little bit smaller than a lot of people thought, but he's like Trent Williams athletic. So that's always exciting. But despite this Trent Williams athleticism, he's super inconsistent, like on film. So this is a big week for him, for coaches. You mentioned like getting to know him. I talked to some guys from Washington who said that they were really interested in speaking with him because they want to kind of understand where this inconsistency comes from, and understand him better as a player, right? Then there's Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse. Again, a guy that is very
take
consistent.
him because he went to the best school on earth. I mean,
yeah,
honestly.
I do. I mean, but like he looked good. Like that's the thing. Like we're gonna go through a lot of offensive linemen because they all look good, and they all look good in one-on-ones, which is for an offensive lineman, Craig, as like very, very hard to do. Like they all looked dominant. And then like Darnell Wright, the kid from Tennessee, who's 6'6", I think he weighed in at 345. Huge man. He looked like that dude. Like he looked like a first round guy. And so the fact that he's here, like, is he trying to bump himself into the first round? Maybe. But if he's available at 16, I think you sprint to the podium to get him because I don't want to say he was the most dominant offensive lineman here because there was a couple other guys who had good days, but I was so impressed with him. Like if I was his agent, I'd be like, hey man, you could probably go home now.
And that happens, by the way. You have a good day at the Senior Bowl and you get some buzz and, scouts are reaching out to to you as an agent. Be like, hey man, like we really like your guy. I don't know that he needs to do a lot more.
Yeah.
You shut it down.
Yeah. Like just watching him in one-on-ones, like he's 345. So for him to kick back in his pass sets, for him to sit on bulls the way he did in the run game, the short area quickness to just kind of pop someone in the mouth. Like I was super impressed with him. He had the best game against the best defensive player in college football, Will Anderson in Alabama. So for me, I know he's only had one really good year of college production. So the consistency thing there from a season standpoint, like year to year, I think is really interesting, but I was so impressed with him. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the week goes with that. And then I want to say like Tyler Steen out of Alabama, again, like we've already talked about 4 people who had excellent days in one-on-ones, which is a defensive drill. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make a lot of sense that they all had good days, but there's no way all of these guys go in the first round is my point. So if all these, maybe like Darnell Wright sneaks into the first round and maybe DeJuan Jones, the Ohio State tackle, who's everyone's talking about. He's 6'8". He weighed in at 375. He's got 36 and 3/4 inch arms, which is like
that's a lot of reach.
It's an alien number. He was dominant in one-on-ones yesterday. We watched him. Remember, Craig? We watched him. And he's, again, there's a little bit of athletic inconsistency, but because he has this tremendous length and because he is a good athlete for a man that size, like he might screw around and sneak into the first round. So if, let's say, Darnell Wright and DeJuan Jones sneak into the first round or early in the second, you still have a pick of 3 really good offensive linemen who could play right tackle for you if you're picking in that second round area. So for me, I was just super impressed. And then we haven't even talked about the centers. And I think the centers are maybe the most interesting one because Ron, Marty have all kind of specified that they're really interested in finding a center, a young center, a guy that can do some stuff for them. And the kid from Minnesota, what's his name? John Michael Schmitz.
Jacob Jingleheimer Schmitz.
Yes, right. He looked.
Just got my inner Chris Berman and it came out.
I mean, he looked
Jacob Jingleheimer Schmitz.
He looked like the best center in the draft. Now, is he going to be there in the third round if you pick a right tackle in the second? Like, probably not, but did a great job in pass protection, could reach a shade, all those things, which I was a little uncertain about watching because he's not the fastest footed guy in the world. And then I'm not even going to attempt this guy's name. Actually, I'm going to attempt it. It's a Slugan Olowatum is what I'm going to say, from Michigan, is a center who's kind of in that same sphere as Schmitz. Didn't have as great a day, but is still a good football player. Does he sneak to the third? Can you get your center of the future there? I don't know. And then there's all these guys who are guard converts who are now playing center to kind of show their position versatility. So maybe you fall in love with one of those guys. So the point is, long story short, really good opportunity to build your offensive line out and not have to pay a premium in terms of first round pick for it, I guess is what I'm saying. If you want to pick him in the first round, pick him in the first round. If you don't feel like that's a necessity and you feel like corner value is better, I think there's 4 guys at offensive tackle you feel really good about, and then there's 2 centers, probably 3 centers that you feel really good about. So I think that bodes well for Washington in terms of addressing some of the issues that they have.
And a ton of guards, obviously, as we were just talking about as well. For whatever it's worth, looking at one mock draft, and I've looked at a couple, but just I have one in front of me right now to not like start just reading off a bunch of mock drafts on a podcast. But like this is from The Athletic a couple days ago, and they've got kind of the tackle corner run starting at 8 with Paris Johnson.
Right.
You got the kid from Northwestern going 9th. Peter Skoronsky, which is a great offensive lineman name.
Right.
Joey Porter Jr. Going 10 is a corner. 12th, you've got, so that was Jordan Addison, wide receiver. Broderick Jones going 13th to the Jets. And then Devin Witherspoon going 15th, and then 16th, Christian Gonzalez. Right. Or the corner out of Oregon going to Washington, with Kelly Ringo, the corner out of Georgia, going after him in this mock. So like that corner offensive tackle run, like that's going to be a fun thing to talk about on draft night because those guys are probably going to start going in that range. Now, in the same mock draft, you scroll down to the second round and you have kind of the same thing happening again, around those same picks. Cody Mauch, the offensive lineman out of North Dakota State, goes 43. Then you have Washington taking Jalen Duncan, the tackle out of Maryland, at 47. Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma, offensive tackle, going 48. So you kind of have a lot of the similar guys with by the way, Matthew Bergeron, the Syracuse guard, not going until later. Darnell Wright going later. DeJuan Jones going later. So like kind of that 40 to 55 range, you're going to see that next run on both corners and offensive linemen, at least the way the draft is shaping up right now. We have 2 months for teams to reshape their boards, but like that's what we're looking at.
Right. And I think that feels right. Now, I think the names will they'll for sure change in terms of sequencing, like based on yesterday. So one day of Senior Bowl, Darnell Wright and DeJuan Jones will go before Duncan, I think, based on yesterday's practice. Now, when they get to the combine, they have interviews, all of those things show up, and maybe it reshuffles back to normal. But I think that's exactly what you're looking at. You're looking at a high tackle DB run, and you're looking at another one in the second round. And I think if you didn't get your DB in the first round, you're getting him in the second round. And if you didn't get your tackle in the first round, you're getting him in the second round. And I think if you're a team that needs that stuff, like Washington, I think you're in a really good spot, quite frankly. So, like, of all the years to kind of have a down receiver class, to have all these kind of issues with the draft, the 2 areas of strength, I think, are things that Washington needs. So perfect,
Yeah. And then we'll see obviously what happens with like Daron Payne. All of a sudden, if they have 2 first rounders because they make a trade there, like, could they get 2 really high level starters depending on who they trade with, all that kind of stuff is certainly in the mix. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. All right, Logan, I wanted to ask you something real quick about kind of the evaluation process with Washington specifically not having an OC currently. If you're on that scouting staff, like I know it obviously can be done. This is a thing that happens all the time in the NFL, but you don't know what scheme you're playing next year. Like you're still writing your reports, like the trait. A guy doesn't go from running a 4.6 to a 4.4 because you're running Air Coryell versus West Coast. But what is the kind of process that you would be going through right now? How are you organizing your reports? What kind of things are you prioritizing? Not knowing what not knowing how this piece is going to ultimately fit into a system of needs.
Yeah, and that's a really good question because it is tough. And so what I've done is I just said, who is the best player? Like full stop. Who is the guy that's going to be? So like I do like a green, yellow, orange, red kind of tier, so I can just look at the sheet and be like, these are the greens, these are the whatever. And like I said, I have 4 green offensive linemen at the Senior Bowl right now, right? And I have 2 DBs, but I haven't finished the DBs yet, right? And so the thing that I say is like, these are the guys that are going to be starters in the NFL. Like they will be. Now, how good they are is probably system dependent. So like, let's take DeJuan Jones because he's like everybody. He's the flavor of the day right now. He's an excellent athlete for being 375 pounds. He's got the longest arms like in Senior Bowl history, and he had like a dominant day yesterday. But if I'm running outside zone, like I probably devalue him a little bit. You know, like I think he's physically capable of doing it. I think he can move, and I think when you watch his Ohio State tape, you say there are some movement skills that actually you say he could do outside zone. But do I want to major an outside zone with him as my right tackle? Probably not. You know, so then I'd probably prioritize a guy like Darnell Wright. But even Darnell Wright, despite his tremendous foot speed, despite his tremendous size, maybe I want to go someone a little bit smaller, and then I prioritize Jalen Duncan, who is this freak athlete who can run like a deer and move around and just do all this crazy stuff. So maybe just because of a scheme fit, he moves up my board and becomes my number 1 tackle. And like, you know, in my film watching, he was for sure my number 1 tackle. But then after kind of combining that with the Senior Bowl and how dominant some of these other guys were in the one-on-ones, you're like, man, like that factors into the evaluation. So not that would be a bad thing if you had to draft Jalen Duncan. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't be a terrible thing. Like there's 4 starters right now. It's just about which one of those 4, in my opinion, would be the correct fit. And the same thing applies to center, right? If like Schmidt, or whatever his name is, the kid from Minnesota, is a big body center who's not the fastest footed guy. He showed me some stuff yesterday that was very impressive in terms of movement skills. But if that's the case, I'm probably going with the guy from Notre Dame or probably going with the guy from Michigan who are a little bit more twitchy. And again, that's just a simple scheme shift. If I want to do a lot of drop back passing, the bigger tackles are nice. The bigger center's nice. All those things factor in terms of sequence. So we've established that there are these 4 guys that could play. Now we just have to say, how do we prioritize them in our scheme? And I think that is something that is always going to be looming over this process until the OC is hired.
Right. And so just to clarify, right, they'll submit their reports, and as long as you have an OC by the draft, which there's 0% chance that they don't, they'll have one by the combine. They'll probably have one by the end of next week. Well, maybe not the end of next week if it's Bieniemy because, they might need to wait till after the Super Bowl. But mid-February at the latest, then it's like, okay, based off what we saw, this is how he would plug into an outside zone-based scheme. This is how we run into. So for the scouts, it's like not that big of a deal. Maybe it makes it a little bit harder. Your Nets cat's a little bit wider. You're doing a little bit more guessing as opposed to really thinking through that lens. But it really doesn't have that big of an impact. The one thing I think you do miss is not having them there to interview. And this is, like Ron is also not there. And if you have your OC or your head coach and you're looking at a guy in the first round, like you want those guys to have conversations. And while there are opportunities at the combine and on the team visits, it is just one thing that kind of passes by. Ultimately, getting the right guy in is more important. Like hiring the right OC is more important than hiring that guy fast enough that he can talk to a prospect at the Senior Bowl. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's interesting to say or to not have that opportunity. Although as I say this thought just came to mind, so I apologize for rambling. I do remember talking to some of the scouts and like some of the college folks when I was on the beat. and they kind of appreciated when the coaches didn't come to the Senior Bowl.
Right.
Because the coaches, as you go, get more involved in the process, and the scouts need to have their reports like compiled and finished. And this is a chance for them to get that one-on-one time as scouts. And then later on, once they've got kind of their finished reports and they've said, hey, this is someone we should really be targeting, the coaches can then lead those interviews at the combine and on the visits. So this is it's still kind of in-season scouting, if you will, versus the off-season scouting, like draft prep, that kind of more is the mode you're in at the combine and beyond.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. Like I talked to Ron last year at the combine in terms of not having to take on the full scouting responsibility, like the hiring of Martin Mayhew, like what that means for him. And Martin's here. So Ron trusts Martin, right? And Martin's going to handle that interview process. So instead of Ron having to kind of go down there, waste his offseason, kind of burn the candle at both, not waste the offseason, but burn the candle at both ends, he can kind of be fresh, and Martin can do his job and say, these were the things I interviewed him about. These are the things, and kind of set the table for those, those 30 visits that they have and the combine and all those different things, and kind of lay that down for Ron so that Ron doesn't have to handle all that stuff. And then Ron can kind of be the traditional head coach role. And when it's time for Ron to enter the interview process, like he can do that, And then obviously I was on the flight with Ken Zampese. He's down here. And I said, why are you down here? He's like, well, I haven't even started my film watching yet. I feel like this is the most important step because I get a feel for the guy, I get a feel for the human being. And to me, that's more of a priority. And so that makes a lot of sense to me too, because it's like, I don't want to watch film on a guy that I can't coach or I don't like. And he had a couple really good examples from his career that kind of alluded to that and why that was important. So I think it just kind of depends on the coach, depends on the guy, depends on the structure. But I also think this is a scouts event more than a coach's event. So if the coach isn't here, you should buy, coach isn't here. It's like, that's why you hire a guy like Martin, right? That's why you have your college scouts, and they're all here. They're all watching this because this is an important data point. And then I had a conversation with Mike McDaniel last year about whether he goes to the Senior Bowl, whether he goes to the combine. And he was like, I don't watch any of the stuff anymore because I can watch it all on film. And because I watch so much film, I get a better comparison of the guys. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Right. So you're watching film to film versus oh, wow, this guy's really fast in person. Then you watch him on film. You're like, was he?
Yeah, right. And so I think again, everyone's got a different process. So that's what I love about scouting is it's like this inexact science, everyone thinks they've got their tells and they've got their little things that kind of give you the edge, but ultimately it's a crapshoot. So you're factoring in what you see from the season, what you see from the Senior Bowl, what you see from the combine. And then the most important element that we are not privy to as analysts is the interview process.
100%.
Because the coaches, that's what separates their draft board. And I had a conversation with a coach one time. This was interesting. Speaking of where and how to weigh the Senior Bowl in the evaluation process. And he was like, don't let a bad Senior Bowl outweigh a full season of good tape.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so as much as people want to put a lot of weight on this, and they should, because it's good versus good, guys are getting coached or doing different stuff. It's 1 week of practice ultimately. You know what I mean? And while it's an important piece, it's not the only piece.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a great point. And I think sometimes we ride the waves a little bit too much. And then all of a sudden at draft day, it's like, how did that guy who was awesome all 4 years of college and had a bad 40-yard dash at the combine go in the first round? It's like, I don't know, maybe he was a good football player. And as far as Ron not being there, for instance, he's got to hire his coaching staff, right? He's probably talking to whoever working on that. And also free agency is first. And so maybe at this point, I don't know, but this is also the time of year that a lot of the pro scout meetings are happening. And so they got to set their free agency board. And obviously, Martin needs to be a part of that as well. So it's not like they're working behind the GM's back, but there's a whole other scouting department within every NFL organization that has a job to do on the free agent side before you even get to the draft. And a lot of times that work, they want it to be done first, one, because free agency happens first, but two, then they bring in the pro scouts to the college process to get another set of eyes on everything. And so there's a lot that's happening kind of simultaneously, parallel timelines, if you will. And so Ron certainly, like, I don't know whether Ron is currently doing season review work right now, whether he's doing pro scouting right now, whether he's focused on his staff right now, but there is plenty to do for him that doesn't involve being at the Senior Bowl.
And I think also you bring up a really good point there is the draft informs your free agent decisions. So let's just say, for example, that the second tier of tackle in this class wasn't very good. I'm going to be a little bit more desperate in free agency to find a tackle, right? Like it just makes sense. So you need to kind of have a baseline understanding of how to value the tackle market based on the draft. Like they are linked, you know what I'm saying? So I can't make decisions. I wouldn't want to make a decision about a free agent without having some information about the draftable prospects at offensive line. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, totally.
And so for me, like, this is all part of the process. So to think that it happens in like this perfect linear order, which you're pointing out, is ridiculous, because you need all the information, or at least an idea of the information, before you go in and make some of these offseason decisions.
Yeah. That's exact. Yeah, 100%. All right. When we get back, some thoughts on Tom Brady retiring, and that's how we end the show here on Take Command. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. All right, Logan, let's wrap up with the news of the day, which of course is that Beyonce's announced her world tour.
I'm sure that is news, but
that is the news of the day.
Yeah.
Secondarily, Tom Brady also announced his retirement. You played against Brady, obviously. First of all, just how weird is it? Like he was probably 10 years into his career when you got into the league, and he's still playing until this year, and you've been out for 3 years now?
Yeah. So just like for some context, I remember he was in like year 10 or 11, and his son was Norm Chow's agent. Norm Chow's agent or son was his agent, and so he'd come to UCLA and throw, and he needed somebody to like catch balls for him. Mm-hmm. So he was in like year 10 or 11, like kind of, at the peak of his powers seemingly. And I would go catch balls for him. Like, they call me down.
Nice. I didn't realize you had a quasi-personal relationship with him.
Personal is a strong word, but I'd go down.
Yeah, but like you've had experience with him.
Yeah. And I just remember thinking like, his attention to detail in that moment was like something that really showed me what it meant to be a pro, and then to see him just kind of just kick Father Time in the teeth. I mean, he's the best quarterback of all time. He's the most winningest, whatever those stats are. And I really like how he did it today. He kind of just did like a little, Instagram post or, YouTube video or whatever he did. And I think there was some, I just like that, that it was kind of subdued. And, part of me, because I was a fan, my parents are from New England. So, they're big Tom Brady fans. And part of me was hoping he'd come back for one more run and, get back to the Super Bowl, get back to that level that we saw. But I also understand that, it's tough, man. It's a tough deal to be at that point in your life, at that point in your career, and try to get competitively that high again. So, I don't think he has anything else to prove. I don't think he has any more money to make. I don't think it's really just his call. And like, if there's one way to go out, like that's the way you want to go. You know what I mean? And I don't think his legacy's like messed up or anything like that. It's one of the best legacies of all time. So man, it's a little bit of a bummer that it's an end of an era, and it's one of those things that's like nostalgic, that time keeps passing and that, time waits for no man type of thing. But, really happy for him and his career. And it is crazy. Like you said, that he's had almost 3 of my careers in his one career, which is pretty wild.
Yeah. And it's not like you had a short career.
Yeah.
You had a nice run in the league. He played 20 years in New England, and then 3 more in Tampa. He's 45 years old, which is, I don't know the next time we'll see a guy play that long. I mean, for context, like I think Rodgers is 38 or 39, so he'd have to play 6 or 7 more years
to
get to where Brady is.
And it's so weird. Like everyone's like, quarterbacks are playing longer now, and that's true. They are playing longer. Quarterbacks would kind of retire in that 33 to 35 age, but because of the protection rules they're getting now, which I think are good rules.
Yeah.
They can play a little bit longer, but you see Russell Wilson kind of see in his end. You see Peyton Manning, you see Drew Brees, you see these guys who, again, were kind of in that same bucket as Tom, and then he just kind of kept going. And I think that longevity is something that is so unprecedented, man. And I just count myself lucky to have seen it. It's like one of those historic things, like you're going to tell your kids about, like, oh, I got to see Tom Brady play, or I got to play against Tom Brady, or whatever it is. So it's really cool.
So his teams never had a losing season until this year.
Tampa Bay, yeah.
And he still made the playoffs in just a torrid NFC South. But he never missed the playoffs in his career. That 2001 year comes in for Drew Bledsoe. They go 11-3. Next year, they actually only went 9-7. But then all the way through pretty much double-digit wins. Not pretty much. It is double-digit wins every year. Obviously, he had the torn ACL in 2008 in the first game of the season. But like just looking through these numbers feels fake. I mean, it is absurd how consistent he was. I should say 2002, they did miss the playoffs. The year in between the first Super Bowl win and then, 03, they make it back. And then 04, 05. I think are the years that he
3, dude. How crazy is that to throw that number out there?
His first Super Bowl wins 2001.
It's crazy.
Like it's truly remarkable just what he was able to do over the course of time. I will say one of my favorite stats is that it was like last year or 2 years ago, he crossed 1,000 yards rushing for his career, which was just hilariously funny. But in terms of passing yards, obviously what he did and accumulated is going to be hard to beat because he was so excellent for so long. And that's the thing, is it's kind of like what LeBron's doing in the NBA right now, where it's like, okay, sure, are there other guys that were better at their peaks? Maybe, but he's right there. His peak is as good as anybody's. And he just stayed there for so much longer. Like Michael Jordan, sure, if you want to say he was a better basketball player than LeBron James, fine. But like LeBron is playing at basically the level that Jordan played and LeBron's been playing for 20 years. And that was what Brady has done. And I think that it is remarkable to kind of talk about some of those details and what makes him so great, because he's not like it's easier to figure out what makes Mahomes great, right? And to an extent, it was even easier to figure out what made Peyton Manning great. And I will admit that like back in the day when we were having the Manning Brady debate, I know Brady had the rings, but I was like, I don't know. There's just something about what Manning does.
Right.
And I think over time, like I just came to appreciate it. And as my understanding of football grew, I appreciated it and came to really understand what made Brady so special. And it's that he is probably the best decision maker to ever play that position. He just makes the right decision faster than everyone else all the time. And it's like, oh, this is the coverage. These are the routes. This is where the ball should go. I put it exactly where it's supposed to be. And it's not this, Peyton Manning get to the line of scrimmage, decipher the defense, call a new play, Omaha this, shift that. Like he just got up to the line. Brady would, figure out, okay, I see through your disguise. I know exactly what you're doing. I know what we have called. This is where the ball should go. And I put it exactly where it's supposed to be or where it's supposed to be. And he also had some other like subtle skills. He's one of the best movers within the pocket we've ever seen. He manipulates the pocket for space. And like, it's been really cool to actually watch Mahomes show off that skill the last couple of weeks, because he can't run out of the pocket with the ankle. But with Brady, it's like that and the decision-making, that's it. Like that's the greatness. And it's so distilled, but it's the most important skill that a quarterback can have. So he's the best ever at the most important skill, and that's why he's the best quarterback ever.
Yeah, and a couple things I want to talk about there. Like one, I got a little story. So when I went and used to catch with him, it happened probably 3 or 4 times. Like he's out there with like just him and like a couple of his boys from the area, because he's from Cali, and they're all just kind of cutting up. And then he gets back and he starts throwing the football, and like he's like, run a dig, run a comeback, run a go, and you just kind of stand there. And I don't talk; I just catch a football and then get it back to him. And I remember we were running comebacks, so you're outside the numbers at like that 18 to 20 yard range, and you're working back to 15. And we did probably 5 of them. And on the first 2, the ball was like, it was perfect ball, like really catchable football, like right on my outside shoulder. And he kind of was like, nope, do it again. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't ask him, but he kind of saw that I was like, what's the deal? Like, these are perfect throws. And he's like, I want to hit you right on your Adam's apple every time. And if he didn't get it, he was going to be like, we're going to do it again. And the fact that we were only out there for an hour and 15 minutes, I think is a testament to how accurate he was. I'm not kidding. Like, and to have to give yourself that standard. And like, it wasn't like, how easy would it have been to be like, oh, I hit your outside shoulder, like next one. It's like, no, I want to be here. And I just remember thinking that's like that, like Michael Jordan, that's like that LeBron James, that's like that Kobe Bryant, like weird competitiveness with yourself that really makes you great. And it's something that you know, like when I played, like it took, like that's a small moment. That was like 5 minutes of his time. But I remembered that throughout my career, and I try to apply that to everything, you know? So a very cool experience, but also kind of speaks to that kind of uber competitor. And also I think it's really crazy that fans are now saying like, oh, Patrick Mahomes is better than Tom Brady. Like, I think Patrick Mahomes is a fantastic football player, but when you've done it for 23 years, now we can start talking about them being in the same conversation. It's not only about longevity, but it's about that consistency you were talking about, right? Winning records, playoff appearances, Super Bowls. And it's so funny because I was the same as you. I was like, Peyton Manning does more for the Indianapolis Colts than Tom Brady does for the Patriots. But the fact that he's just been able to keep going and evolve, I think evolve as the game has evolved, has been a testament to him to go to Tampa Bay and change the offense, elevate that group of playmakers. Again, like there's nothing on his resume that makes you think like, man, someone's done it better. There have been guys with stronger arms. There have been guys who've been more accurate. There have been maybe better decision makers at certain points in their career, people who are involved more in the offense, but no one's done kind of the average or the aggregate better than him for a long time. And I think that's, you know, again, like we don't, you know, like there's that story about the guy who was arguing Peyton Manning's Hall of Fame appearance. Have you heard the story? And he just so basically like you have to like put a packet together, like, oh, he rushed for this many yards.
You're talking about like in the room.
In the room on the day. And dude just gets up and is like, it's Peyton Manning, and then just sits back down. And like, that's all he needs to say. And I feel like, you know, emphatically, Tom Brady's the same way. It's like when that day comes, you just stand up and be like, hey, Tom Brady. And then everyone's going to be like, oh, yeah, first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah,
you know, first ballot,
let's not waste our time.
Yeah, right. Well, we don't need to even talk about it. So, like, we could talk about all the things he's done, but they're so well documented. They're so well storied. Like, what's the point, you know?
Yeah, I would say that while it is a documentary made from a point of view, the Brady 10-part series that he did with ESPN, like it's very clearly made by Brady, and there's some points in there that I wish there was, you know, a more journalistic person asking questions and then control of the final cut and like maybe go a little deeper on some things. But they do touch on some of the controversial stuff, and I do think there's a couple points where Brady doesn't look great on certain things. But all in all, like it's a fascinating look inside his brain. In the same way that you know, The Last Dance was a fascinating look inside Michael Jordan's brain. Like is there clear editorial control that Jordan had on some level over that documentary, and should that be accounted for, and thus it's not his entire story? Yes. But you also definitely get to see inside his brain, and I think the Brady thing is the same. The Derek Jeter doc also, by the way, the same way, and would highly recommend all three of those. But going back to just to appreciate the detail that we were talking about with him, if you were to say Steph Curry's got a workout and he's got to make 500 shots, like he'd be out of the gym in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
To, like you were saying, to like, hey, it's got to be here. It's got to be, you know, on the Adam's apple, and to be out there for an hour 15. If you told us like, hey, you guys combined, you got to make 300 or you got to make 500 shots, we'd be in the gym longer than Curry would by a lot with 2 basketballs. And if you said that we had to swish everyone or it didn't count, we'd be in the gym. Like we would just be stuck there forever. Like they would never, we'd be toast. And by the way, a lot of NBA players would also take double what it would take Steph Curry. And he's their peer, allegedly. So like that kind of intricacy from someone like Brady, I think is so masterful. And to keep that over the amount of time, I will say, you know, because I've been thinking a lot about Mahomes, obviously, with the Super Bowl coming up, and he's now hosted 5 straight AFC Championship games, won 3 of them. You know, he's either going to have 2 Super Bowl runner-ups and a win, or 2 wins and a runner-up. He's got the best start to a career. He's passed Brady for that mantle. Best start to a career. And I also think Mahomes plays quarterback at a higher level than anyone we've ever seen.
He's just different. It's like
right. He just does. He's just capable of more stuff.
He's like he is the modern quarterback. He's got mobility. He can play within structure and timing. He can, do off schedule stuff. He can scramble, and it's not like labored. Like when you're watching like Russell Wilson, who's one of maybe the best scrambler of a generation or best extender of plays. Like for him, he had to extend the play because he couldn't see from the pocket all the time. He couldn't see the middle of the field. Like Mahomes, that restrictions doesn't apply, right? It's not like Lamar Jackson, who's this tremendous runner, right, and elevates the offense that way. He has that ability, but it's like he is what everyone is now looking for. It used to be the next Peyton Manning, used to be the next Tom Brady, but quite frankly, from a skill set standpoint, it's the next Patrick Mahomes. And so, it's like that's why Josh Allen is so dynamic, right? It's that kind of guy that can win with the legs, but also can play from the pocket. And I totally agree with you. Like, even though Brady right now, like you'd say, is a better player, like the person that if they can string like a 12-year career together doing this, like it's obviously Patrick Mahomes. You know what I mean? Like it's
right. So. And that's the thing. Is the difference is like there's a different conversation to be had of like who's the greatest ever, the resume, all of that, and then you're talking like Brady. Montana is probably second. Manning is right there, and some other guys that certainly deserve to be mentioned. But in terms of like whose peak is the highest, I think Mahomes has that, which is remarkable. And the fact that it's led to a Brady-like level of success is remarkable as well. And like why he gets to enter that conversation at such a young age where someone like Brady has set the bar so high. It's like, well, he can't play longer yet. He's limited by time, but in terms of, and again, this is like a compliment to Brady, especially for younger fans that don't remember early Tom Brady, because early Tom Brady, if you could be 20 years old and like you weren't around for the start of his career, literally, like. The only guy that has the resume early in his career like Mahomes has was Brady. And the fact that dude just retired and that career started nearly a quarter century ago is remarkable. All right.
Sorry, just really quick.
Let's wrap up with your final thought on it.
It's like the Rob Gronkowski thing. I know that sounds crazy to compare Patrick.
No, I think I know where you're going.
But like, Rob Gronkowski was the most dominant tight end in the NFL for like a 5-year span. And like he is in the Hall of Fame because of 5 years. And it's like people put him as the number one tight end of all time because of those 5 years. And I don't want to say Patrick Mahomes is not going to play another down of football, but that is kind of, if Patrick Mahomes were to retire today, like he goes down as maybe not the best of all time, but definitely he's in the conversation as like this dude was like incredible. Like that. And people need that kind of context. Like he is doing Rob Gronkowski level stuff at the quarterback position, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, totally. And obviously it doesn't seem like he's slowing down anytime soon. I will say about Brady, actually, is just a final thought too, though. He did so much with, I don't want to say so little, but like a fairly average set of weapons his whole career, which is why like the 2007 Brady season with Randy Moss, where they it's again, the Giants beating them in the Super Bowl it's the greatest upset of all time for a reason. What he did that year with Randy Moss, it's like, oh, you want to see what I can do when I have one of the greatest wide receivers ever? I'm going to smash the touchdown record. Okay, thanks. I got 50. And so, when we talk about the longevity, it's the longevity of greatness. Like his peak, it's not maybe Mahomes level because he couldn't run around and like throw from all the arm angles and do some of the crazy stuff that Mahomes does. But even without that, his production peak is basically as high as Mahomes was. And that is a testament to the greatness and just how good he was at his particular things as well. All right, that'll do it for today's podcast. We will be back on Monday on YouTube, Tuesday in your audio feeds with Sam Fortier of the Washington Post. And of course, Logan will have the rest of his week at the Senior Bowl as well to talk about. So that's still to come here on Take Command. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening or watching right now, and we'll see you next week.